The rain hammered against the old barn roof like angry fists. Marcus wiped the sweat from his forehead as he checked on his sick calf one more time. The small animal was finally breathing normally after 3 days of worry. He had spent most of his savings on medicine, but it was worth it. Thunder crashed overhead as Marcus prepared to head back to his small farmhouse. Through the storm, he heard something that made him freeze. It wasn't the wind or rain. Someone was crying outside. Marcus grabbed his flashlight and pushed open the heavy barn door. The beam of light cut through the darkness and rain. There, huddled against the side of his barn, was a young woman. She couldn't have been more than 18 years old. Her long black hair was soaked, and her clothes were torn. Blood-stained, her arm where deep scratches ran from her shoulder to her elbow. "Hey, are you okay?" Marcus called out, raising his voice over the storm. The girl looked up with wide, frightened eyes. She said something in a language he had never heard before. Her voice was weak and she was shivering badly. Marcus could see she was hurt and scared. Without thinking twice, Marcus stepped into the rain. "Come on, let's get you inside where it's warm," he said gently, holding out his hand. The girl hesitated for a moment, studying his face in the flashlight beam. Something in his kind eyes must have convinced her because she slowly reached out and took his hand. Her fingers were ice cold. Marcus helped her to her feet and guided her into the barn. The space was warm and dry, filled with the comfortable smell of hay and animals. He quickly grabbed some old blankets from a storage box and wrapped them around her shoulders. "What happened to you?" he asked, pointing to her injured arm. She spoke again in her strange language, gesturing wildly with her hands. Marcus couldn't understand the words, but her tone told him everything. She was terrified of something or someone. Marcus examined her wounds more carefully. They looked like claw marks, but bigger than any animal he knew in these parts. The cuts were deep but clean, and they needed attention soon to prevent infection. "Wait here," Marcus said, holding up his hand in a stay gesture. He ran to his house and returned with his first aid kit, some clean clothes and a thermos of hot soup. The girl watched his every movement as he cleaned and bandaged her arm. She winced, but didn't pull away. When he offered her the soup, she drank it gratefully, her eyes never leaving his face. Marcus had always lived alone on his small farm. His nearest neighbor was 5 miles away and he rarely had visitors. But something about this mysterious girl made him want to help. She seemed lost and completely alone in the world. As the storm continued to rage outside, Marcus made up a comfortable bed for her in the clean corner of the barn where he kept fresh hay. He gave her his warmest jacket and made sure she had plenty of blankets. "You can stay here tonight," he said, pointing to the makeshift bed. "Tomorrow we'll figure out how to get you home." The girl nodded, seeming to understand his meaning if not his words. For the first time since he found her, she smiled slightly. It transformed her entire face, making her look younger and less afraid. Marcus checked on his animals one more time and made sure the barn was secure. The girl was already lying down, curled up in the blankets like a wounded animal seeking safety. Her breathing had become steady and peaceful. Before leaving, Marcus placed his cell phone near her bed and showed her how to use it if she needed anything. He doubted she understood modern technology, but he wanted her to know she wasn't abandoned. "I'll be right in the house if you need anything," he said, pointing toward his home. "You're safe now." As Marcus walked through the rain to his house, he couldn't shake the feeling that his life had just changed forever. The girl's frightened eyes haunted him, and those strange claw marks worried him more than he wanted to admit. Inside his house, Marcus made coffee and sat by the window where he could see the barn. The building looked peaceful in the storm, but he couldn't sleep. Every few minutes he checked to make sure no lights were moving around outside. Something had hurt that girl badly enough to send her running through a dangerous storm. Whatever it was, Marcus had a feeling it might come looking for her. He kept his grandfather's old rifle close by, just in case. The storm finally began to calm near dawn, but Marcus never went to bed. He sat in his chair, watching over the barn and the mysterious girl inside it, wondering what morning would bring. The first rays of sunlight crept through Marcus's kitchen window as he poured his 4th cup of coffee. He had been awake all night, watching the barn and listening for any unusual sounds. The storm had passed, leaving everything fresh and clean, but his worry hadn't faded. Marcus decided it was time to check on his unexpected guest. He grabbed some breakfast and walked across the wet grass to the barn. When he pushed open the door, he found the girl sitting up, looking much better than she had the night before. "Good morning," Marcus said with a smile, holding up the food he had brought. The girl's face lit up when she saw him. She spoke in her mysterious language, and though Marcus couldn't understand the words, her tone was clearly grateful. She pointed to her bandaged arm and nodded, showing him that it felt better. Marcus sat down near her and offered the breakfast. As she ate, he studied her more carefully in the daylight. Her skin was bronze from the sun, and her features were unlike anyone from the nearby towns. Her clothes, though torn, were made from materials he didn't recognize. They looked handmade with intricate patterns sewn along the edges. "Where are you from?" Marcus asked, knowing she wouldn't understand but hoping his tone would encourage her to try communicating. The girl finished eating and stood up. She walked to the barn wall and began drawing in the dust on the floor with her finger. First, she drew mountains with jagged peaks. Then she added trees and what looked like small huts scattered throughout a valley. Marcus watched, fascinated. She was showing him her home. It was clearly somewhere remote, far from any modern civilization. She drew stick figures of people around the huts, and then her expression grew dark. Next, she drew larger figures approaching the village. These new shapes were bigger and more threatening. She made growling sounds and showed claws with her hands. Whatever had attacked her village wasn't human. The girl pointed to the claw marks on her arm, then to the threatening figures in her drawing. Marcus understood. Some kind of dangerous creatures had attacked her people, and she had been hurt while escaping. "You ran away," Marcus said, making running motions with his fingers. She nodded vigorously and pointed to herself, then made the running gesture. But then her face filled with worry, and she pointed back toward the mountains she had drawn. She was concerned about her people. Marcus felt a growing sense of responsibility. This girl had escaped from something terrible, and now she was completely alone. She had no way to communicate with the outside world, no way to get help for her people, and no way to get home safely. "We need to contact someone," Marcus said, pulling out his cell phone. The girl jumped back in fear when she saw the device. She had probably never seen modern technology before. Marcus realized that calling the police or authorities might terrify her even more. Plus, how could he explain the situation? No one would believe his story about mysterious creatures attacking a hidden tribe. Marcus put the phone away and tried a different approach. He pointed to himself and said Marcus several times until she understood he was telling her his name. The girl smiled and pointed to herself. "Ayana," she said clearly. "Ayana," Marcus repeated, and her smile grew wider. Now that they had names, communication became a little easier. Ayana continued her drawing, showing Marcus the path she had taken to escape. It wound through forests and over streams, finally ending at his barn. She had been running for days. Marcus was amazed by her survival skills. She had navigated through unknown territory in the dark, found shelter, and somehow avoided whatever had been chasing her. This girl was much stronger and more resourceful than she appeared. As the morning progressed, Marcus showed Ayana around his farm. She was fascinated by everything, especially his animals. She seemed to have a natural way with them, and even his usually grumpy old horse nuzzled her hand gently. But Marcus noticed that Ayana kept looking toward the mountains in the distance. Her eyes held a mixture of longing and fear. She wanted to go home, but she was afraid of what she might find there. Around noon, Ayana suddenly became very alert. She grabbed Marcus's arm and pointed toward the tree line at the edge of his property. At first, Marcus saw nothing. Then a figure emerged from the shadows of the trees. It was a man, tall and muscular, wearing clothes similar to Ayana's. His long black hair was braided, and he carried a spear. More importantly, he was looking directly at them. Ayana called out in her language, her voice filled with relief and excitement. The man responded, and soon they were having a rapid conversation across the distance. "Friend of yours?" Marcus asked. Ayana nodded enthusiastically and gestured for Marcus to come with her. Together, they walked toward the tree line to meet the newcomer. As they got closer, Marcus could see that this man was older than Ayana, maybe in his 30s. His face was serious, and his eyes held the look of someone who had seen battle. When he looked at Marcus, his expression was wary but not hostile. Ayana spoke quickly to the man, pointing to Marcus and then to her bandaged arm. She was obviously explaining how Marcus had helped her. The man's expression softened slightly as he listened. When Ayana finished talking, the man stepped forward and placed his hand over his heart. He spoke a few words in their language, bowing his head slightly toward Marcus. "I think he's thanking you," Marcus realized. The man then spoke to Ayana again, his tone becoming urgent. Whatever he was telling her made her face grow pale with worry. She turned to Marcus with tears in her eyes and began gesturing frantically toward the mountains. Marcus didn't need to understand their language to know that something terrible was happening to Ayana's people. The question was, what could he possibly do to help? The warrior's name was Kale, and his news was devastating. Through Ayana's desperate attempts to translate, Marcus learned that the creatures had returned to attack the village again. Many people were trapped, and the tribe's warriors were fighting a losing battle. Kale spoke with increasing urgency, pointing toward the mountains and making gestures that clearly indicated time was running out. Ayana translated as best she could, using simple words and hand signals to help Marcus understand. "More. Come," Ayana said in broken English, surprising Marcus. She had been listening to him carefully and was already picking up some words. "Many bad. Hurt people." Marcus felt his heart sink. Here was a young woman whose entire world was in danger, and she was asking for help from a simple farmer who had never been in a fight more serious than an argument with his neighbor about property lines. "What can I do?" Marcus asked, feeling helpless. "I'm just one person." Kale seemed to understand the tone of Marcus's question. He spoke to Ayana, who nodded and began drawing in the dirt again. This time she drew what looked like a map. She showed the location of her village, surrounded by mountains and accessible only through narrow passes. Then she drew the creatures. They were large, with massive claws and teeth. From her drawings, they looked like something between a bear and a wolf, but much bigger. She showed how they moved in packs, coordinating their attacks like intelligent predators. "How many?" Marcus asked, holding up his fingers. Ayana considered this, then held up both hands several times. "At least 20, maybe more." Marcus's heart sank further. What could he possibly do against 20 giant predators? But then Kale began speaking again, and his tone was different. He was explaining something important to Ayana, pointing at Marcus repeatedly. Whatever he was saying made Ayana's eyes grow wide with excitement. "He says..." Ayana struggled with the English words. "He says you have powerful spirit, good heart. The animals here." She gestured toward Marcus's farm. "They trust you. They calm." Marcus didn't understand what that had to do with fighting monsters, but Kale continued talking. He pointed to Marcus's rifle, which was visible through the farmhouse window, and nodded approvingly. Then he made shooting motions. "You hunt?" Ayana asked Marcus. "A little," Marcus admitted. He hunted deer occasionally, but nothing like what they were describing. Kyle spoke more urgently now, and Ayana's translation became more excited. He says, "The creatures, they fear loud sounds, like thunder. Your weapon that makes thunder. It could help." Marcus began to understand. They weren't asking him to fight the creatures hand to hand. They needed someone with a gun to help drive them away with loud noises and strategic shots. "But I can't just leave my farm," Marcus protested, "and I don't know anything about those mountains." Ayana looked at him with such hope and desperation that Marcus felt his resolve weakening. She spoke to Kale, who nodded and began making his own drawings in the dirt. Kale's map was much more detailed than Ayana's. He showed multiple routes through the mountains, safe places to hide, and strategic positions where a person with a rifle could provide effective support. It was clear that he was an experienced warrior who understood tactics. "We go together," Ayana said, pointing to all three of them. "You help us help our people." Marcus looked at these two brave people who had somehow ended up on his farm, asking for his help to save their entire tribe. The smart thing would be to say no, to contact the authorities and let them handle it. But something in Ayana's eyes reminded him of the wounded animals he had always felt compelled to help. "What about my animals?" Marcus asked. "I can't just abandon them." Kyle seemed to understand this concern. He spoke to Ayana, who smiled for the first time since learning about the attack. He says, "Our people will watch your animals. When we return, they will make sure everything is safe here." Marcus walked back toward his house, his mind racing. These people were asking him to risk his life for strangers in a place he had never been, fighting creatures he had never seen. It was absolutely crazy. But as he looked back at Ayana and Kyle, he remembered the terror in the girl's eyes when he first found her. He thought about her people, trapped and fighting for their lives against something they couldn't defeat alone. "Give me an hour to get ready," Marcus heard himself saying. Ayana's face transformed with relief and gratitude. She spoke rapidly to Cale, who nodded with respect and clasped Marcus's shoulder in a gesture of brotherhood. Marcus spent the next hour gathering supplies. He packed his rifle, extra ammunition, a first aid kit, food, water, and warm clothes. He also loaded his truck with additional medical supplies and tools that might be useful. While he prepared, Cale studied Marcus's equipment with great interest. The warrior was clearly intelligent and adaptable, examining each item and asking Ayana to translate questions about how things worked. As they prepared to leave, Marcus took one last look at his peaceful farm. He had a feeling that after today, his quiet life would never be the same. But looking at Ayana's determined face and Cale's warrior bearing, he knew he was making the right choice. "Let's go save your people," Marcus said, starting his truck. The journey into the mountains was about to begin, and Marcus had no idea that by the time it was over, he would have earned the eternal gratitude of an entire tribe and changed the course of several lives forever. The truck bounced and jolted as Marcus drove the rough mountain road. After 2 hours, the path became too narrow and rocky for the vehicle. They would have to continue on foot through terrain that looked like it hadn't seen human visitors in decades. Cale led the way with the confident stride of someone who knew every rock and tree. Ayana stayed close to Marcus, helping him navigate the treacherous mountain paths and occasionally pointing out dangerous areas to avoid. "How much further?" Marcus asked during a brief rest, his legs already aching from the steep climb. Ayana held up 3 fingers and pointed at the sun, indicating they had about 3 hours of hiking left. Marcus checked his water supply and adjusted his heavy pack. The rifle felt heavier with each step, but he knew it might be their only advantage against the creatures. As they climbed higher, the sounds of the forest began to change. The normal bird songs and insect noises grew quieter, replaced by an unsettling silence. Cale became more alert, his hand never straying far from his spear. "Something wrong," Ayana whispered, her English improving with each hour they spent together. They reached a rocky outcrop that offered a view of the valley below. Cale pointed toward a distant cluster of structures that looked like small huts scattered around a central clearing. Even from this distance, Marcus could see smoke rising from several locations. "Your village?" Marcus asked. Ayana nodded, tears filling her eyes. "Home," she said simply. Through Marcus's binoculars, the scene looked even worse. Several buildings were damaged and people were moving around frantically, but most disturbing were the large, dark shapes moving around the edges of the settlement. "The creatures," Marcus said, passing the binoculars to Cale. The warrior looked through them and spoke urgently to Ayana. His expression was grim as he handed them back to Marcus. "He says they are bigger than before," Ayana translated, "and there are more of them." Marcus studied the creatures through the binoculars. They were indeed massive, easily twice the size of any bear he had ever seen. Their fur was dark and matted, and they moved with an intelligence that was disturbing. They weren't just attacking randomly. They were coordinating their efforts. "We need a plan," Marcus said, setting down his pack. Cale began drawing in the dirt again, this time creating a detailed map of the village and surrounding area. He showed Marcus the best positions for using the rifle, places where the sound would echo and seem to come from multiple directions. The plan was clever in its simplicity. Marcus would position himself on the high rocks overlooking the village. When Cale gave a signal, Marcus would begin firing shots into the air and at the ground near the creatures. The loud noises and echoes would confuse and frighten them. While the creatures were distracted, Cale and other warriors would attack from a different direction, driving the beasts toward a narrow canyon where they could be trapped or forced to retreat. "What about Ayana?" Marcus asked. "Where will she be?" Cale spoke to her and an argument ensued. It was clear that he wanted her to stay safely hidden while Marcus could see the determination in her eyes that said she wouldn't agree to that. "I go with warriors," Ayana said firmly. "My people need all help." Marcus understood her desire to fight for her home, but he was worried about her safety. The scratch marks on her arm were proof of how dangerous these creatures were. "Stay behind the warriors," Marcus said. "Don't take unnecessary risks." Ayana smiled and touched her bandaged arm. "You teach me to be careful," she said. "I remember." As the sun began to set, they made their way down into the valley. The closer they got to the village, the more evidence they saw of the creatures' attacks. Trees were clawed and broken, and the ground was torn up by massive paws. Marcus found his position among the rocks above the village. From here he had a clear view of the entire settlement and good angles for his shots. He checked his rifle and ammunition one more time, his hands steady despite his racing heart. Kyle and Ayanna disappeared into the shadows, moving toward the village where other warriors were waiting. Marcus watched through his scope as dark figures moved around the settlement below. The creatures were even more terrifying up close. Their yellow eyes gleamed in the fading light, and their growls carried across the valley like thunder. Some were as large as small cars, and they moved with a predatory grace that spoke of intelligence and experience. Marcus saw a group of villagers huddled inside a partially damaged building. The creatures were circling it, testing the walls and looking for weak points. Time was running out. A bird call echoed from the village, Kale's signal. Marcus took a deep breath, aimed his rifle at a spot near the largest creature, and pulled the trigger. The shot cracked like lightning across the valley, echoing off the rock walls until it sounded like a dozen rifles firing at once. The creatures roared in confusion and alarm, spinning around to look for the source of the noise. Marcus fired again, this time at the ground between two creatures. They jumped apart, snarling and snapping at the air. A third shot sent them scrambling away from the building where the villagers were hiding. From the far side of the village, war cries erupted as Kale led the charge. Warriors emerged from hiding spots, shouting and waving torches. The creatures found themselves caught between the mysterious thunder from above and the attacking warriors below. The plan was working, but Marcus could see that the battle was far from over. The creatures were regrouping, and some of them were larger and more aggressive than the others. This was going to be a long night. The battle raged through the night. Marcus lost count of how many shots he fired, his rifle barrel growing hot from constant use. Below in the village, he could see flashes of torchlight and spears as the warriors fought bravely against creatures that outweighed them 3-1. Several times, Marcus saw groups of creatures trying to surround the warriors. Each time, he would fire precisely placed shots that sent the beasts scrambling away in confusion. The echoing gunshots in the mountain valley created the impression of an army of shooters, which kept the creatures off balance. But Marcus was worried about his ammunition. He had brought extra but not enough for an all-night battle. He needed to make every shot count. Through his scope, he spotted Ayanna near the center of the village. Despite promising to stay back, she was right in the thick of the fighting, helping wounded villagers reach safety. Marcus's heart jumped into his throat when he saw a massive creature stalking her from behind. Marcus didn't hesitate. He aimed carefully and fired, the bullet striking the ground inches from the creature's paws. The beast roared and spun around, giving Ayanna time to duck behind a building. As dawn approached, something changed. The creatures began pulling back, retreating toward the canyon that Kyle had pointed out earlier. Marcus could see the warriors pursuing them, driving them away from the village with coordinated attacks. But then Marcus noticed something troubling. The largest creature, a massive beast with scars across its face, wasn't retreating with the others. Instead, it was circling around toward Marcus's position. The creature had figured out where the gunshots were coming. From Marcus watched through his scope as the intelligent beast made its way up the rocky slope toward his hiding spot. It moved carefully, using the rocks and trees for cover. Clearly understanding that it was being hunted, Marcus had two choices: stay and fight, or abandon his position and potentially leave the villagers without covering fire. But looking down at the village, he could see that the immediate threat was over. Most of the creatures were in retreat, and the warriors had the situation under control. The decision was made for him when the scarred creature appeared on the ledge just 50 feet away. It was even more massive up close, its yellow eyes fixed directly on Marcus with unsettling intelligence. Marcus raised his rifle, but the creature was faster. It lunged forward just as Marcus pulled the trigger. The shot went wide, and suddenly 300 pounds of angry predator was bearing down on him. Marcus rolled to the side, feeling claws rake across his backpack. The creature's momentum carried it past him, but it recovered quickly and spun around for another attack. This time Marcus was ready. As the creature charged, he fired point blank into its shoulder. The beast roared in pain and fury but kept coming. Marcus dove behind a large boulder just as massive claws shattered the rock where his head had been. For several terrifying minutes, Marcus played a deadly game of hide and seek among the rocks. The creature was wounded but not defeated. and it was determined to eliminate the source of the thunder that had disrupted its pack's attack. Marcus managed to get off 2 more shots, both hitting the creature but not stopping it. His ammunition was running dangerously low, and the beast seemed to be getting angrier rather than weaker. Just when Marcus thought his luck had run out, war cries echoed from below. Kale and 3 other warriors were climbing up toward the ledge, having noticed the commotion above. The scarred creature heard them coming and made a decision. With a final, hate-filled glare at Marcus, it turned and bounded away into the rocks, disappearing into the mountain wilderness. Marcus slumped against a boulder, his hands shaking from adrenaline. Kale reached him first, followed quickly by Ayanna, who looked terrified when she saw the claw marks on Marcus's backpack. "You hurt?" she asked, checking him for injuries. "Just scared," Marcus admitted, managing a weak smile. Kyle spoke rapidly, and Ayanna translated. "He says you fought like a great warrior. The creature that attacked you was the pack leader. Now that it's wounded and driven away, the others will not return." As they made their way back down to the village, Marcus could see the extent of the damage. Several buildings were destroyed and many people were injured, but they were alive, and that was what mattered. The villagers gathered around Marcus as news of his role in the battle spread. They spoke in their own language, but their gestures and expressions made their gratitude clear. Children touched his rifle with awe, and elderly villagers bowed respectfully. The village chief, an ancient man with wise eyes, approached Marcus. He spoke for several minutes while Ayanna translated. "He says you are now a brother to our people," Ayanna explained. "He says the spirits sent you to us in our time of need. You have earned a place in our tribe forever." Marcus was deeply moved by the honor, but he was also exhausted and worried about his farm. "I should probably head home soon," he said. The chief spoke again, and this time his tone was insistent. "He says no," Ayanna translated with a smile. "He says you cannot leave yet. There is something important that must happen first." Marcus looked around at the grateful faces surrounding him and realized that his adventure was far from over. Whatever the chief had in mind, it was clearly important to these people who had welcomed him as family. As the sun rose fully over the mountains, casting golden light on the village, Marcus wondered what other surprises this remarkable experience would bring. The ceremony began at sunset. Marcus had spent the day helping repair damaged buildings and tending to wounded villagers with his first aid supplies. His medical knowledge, limited as it was, proved invaluable to people who had only traditional healing methods. Throughout the day, villagers had been preparing for something special. They gathered wood for a massive bonfire, prepared foods that filled the air with amazing smells, and created decorations from feathers and carved wood. Ayanna stayed close to Marcus, serving as his translator and guide. Her English was improving rapidly, and she seemed to take pride in helping him understand their customs. "What exactly is this ceremony for?" Marcus asked as the sun began to set. "The chief will explain," Ayanna said mysteriously. "But it is very great honor. Something like this has happened in my lifetime." As darkness fell, the entire village gathered around the central fire. The flames danced high into the night sky, casting flickering shadows on the faces of nearly 200 people. Marcus had not realized the tribe was so large. The chief stood and began speaking in a voice that carried clearly across the gathering. His words were rhythmic and ceremonial, clearly part of an ancient tradition. Other villagers joined in at certain points, their voices rising in harmony. "He tells the story of tonight's battle," Ayanna whispered to Marcus. "He speaks of the stranger who came from beyond the mountains with thunder in his hands and courage in his heart." Marcus felt uncomfortable being the center of so much attention, but he remained respectfully silent as the ceremony continued. Kyle stood next and spoke about the fighting, gesturing dramatically as he described the tactical brilliance of coordinating ground attacks with covering fire from above. Even without understanding the words, Marcus could tell that Kale was making him sound much braver than he felt. Then something unexpected happened. Other warriors began standing and sharing their own stories. But these weren't stories about the recent battle. These were older tales, stories that seemed to go back generations. "They speak of prophecy," Ayanna explained, her voice filled with wonder. "Old stories say that in the tribe's darkest hour, a protector would come from the outside world, someone who speaks with animals and commands the thunder." Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. "But that's just coincidence," he whispered. Ayanna shook her head. "You saw how calm your animals were around me. But did you see how they acted around you? Even the wild animals in these mountains did not fear you. And your thunder weapon, she gestured toward his rifle, it drove away creatures that our warriors could not defeat. The chief called for silence and motioned for Marcus to stand. With Ayanna translating, he began to speak directly to Marcus. He says the prophecies speak of a choice, Ayanna said. The protector from beyond could choose to stay and become one of us or return to his world and remain a friend forever. Marcus looked around at the expectant faces in the firelight. These people had accepted him completely, treating him like family despite knowing him for only a few days. They were offering him a place in their world, a chance to be part of something ancient and meaningful. But Marcus thought of his farm, his animals, his simple life that was waiting for him. This mountain village was beautiful and these people were remarkable, but it wasn't his world. I'm honored, Marcus said, and waited for Ayanna to translate. But my home is in the valley below. My animals need me and I have responsibilities there. The chief nodded as if he had expected this answer. He spoke again, his tone warm and understanding. He says he knew you would choose to return. Ayanna translated. A man who cares for his animals as you do could never abandon them. But he says this does not end our connection. The chief gestured and several villagers stepped forward carrying something covered in beautiful woven cloth. When they uncovered it, Marcus saw an intricately carved wooden staff topped with carved animals and symbols he didn't recognize. This is the staff of the protector, Ayanna explained as the chief placed it in Marcus's hands. It has been waiting for generations for the right person. As long as you carry this, you are a member of our tribe. You can call on us for help and we will always answer. Marcus was deeply moved by the gift. The carving was exquisite, clearly the work of master craftsmen over many years. The chief spoke once more, this time his words carrying the weight of a solemn promise. He says that if you ever need us, place the staff on high ground where it can be seen from the mountains. Ayanna translated. Within one day, warriors will come to your aid. This is our oath to you, and it will be honored by our children and our children's children. As the ceremony concluded, villagers approached Marcus one by one. Some offered gifts, others simply touched his hand or shoulder in gestures of respect and friendship. Children who had been too shy to approach during the day now smiled and waved at him. Kale presented Marcus with a beautifully crafted knife in a decorated sheath. Through Ayanna, he explained that it was made from metal taken from the mountains and blessed by the village elders. For protection on your journey home, Kale said in his own language, though Marcus somehow understood the meaning even before Ayanna translated. As the evening wound down, Marcus realized that he had gained something he had never expected to find. A second family. These people had welcomed him into their lives and offered him a permanent place among them. Even though he was returning to his own world, he would always carry a part of theirs with him. The next morning, a group of young warriors would escort him back to his truck and make sure he reached home safely. But tonight he sat by the dying fire, listening to Ayanna tell him stories of her people and feeling like he had discovered a hidden part of himself. Will you visit us again? Ayanna asked as the last embers glowed in the darkness. Marcus looked at the carved staff in his hands and smiled. I think I will, he said. This isn't goodbye. It's just the beginning. As he settled down to sleep in the guest hut the villagers had prepared for him, Marcus reflected on how much his life had changed in just a few days. He had started as a simple farmer who kept to himself, and now he was the honored protector of an entire tribe. Tomorrow he would return to his quiet farm, but he would never be the same. He had learned that sometimes the most important adventures begin when you simply choose to help someone in need. And somewhere in these mountains he now had a family who would remember his kindness forever. 3 months had passed since Marcus returned from the mountains. Life had settled back into its familiar rhythm of caring for animals, tending crops, and enjoying the peaceful solitude of farm life. But everything felt different now. The carved staff stood in a place of honor in his living room, and he often found himself looking toward the distant mountains, wondering about his friends. Marcus had told no one about his adventure. Who would believe such a story? Instead, he simply said he had been camping when people asked about his brief absence. The physical reminders were easy to explain away: the claw marks on his backpack, the few remaining scratches on his arms, the new knife he sometimes wore. But the changes in Marcus were harder to hide. His neighbors noticed that he seemed more confident, more at peace with himself. Animals that had never approached him before now came readily to his call. Even wild deer would graze peacefully in his pasture, seemingly unafraid of his presence. On this particular morning, Marcus was repairing a fence when he heard his dog barking excitedly. Looking up, he saw a familiar figure emerging from the woods at the edge of his property. It was Ayanna. Marcus dropped his tools and ran toward her, his heart pounding with joy and concern. She looked healthy and strong, dressed now in modern clothes that seemed strange on her, but her smile was exactly as he remembered. "Ayanna, what are you doing here? Is everything okay?" She embraced him warmly, and Marcus was relieved to see that she appeared to be alone and uninjured. "Everything is good," she said, her English now much improved. "I come to bring news and to see my friend." They walked together toward the farmhouse, and Marcus marveled at how naturally she moved through his world now. She seemed to have adapted to life outside the mountains while still maintaining the grace and strength that had impressed him from the beginning. "How did you get here?" Marcus asked. "I learn about your world," Ayanna said with obvious pride. "Kale and others, we study maps. We learn about buses and towns. I come to see how you live and to tell you important things." Inside the house, Marcus made coffee while Ayanna looked around with fascination. She examined his modern conveniences with the same curiosity she had shown on the mountain, asking questions about everything from the refrigerator to the television. "My people are very well," she reported as they sat at his kitchen table. "The creatures have not returned. The village is rebuilt stronger than before, and we have new alliances with other tribes who heard the story of the battle." Marcus was relieved to hear this good news, but he sensed there was more to her visit. "The chief sends message," Ayanna continued. "He says to tell you that your courage has brought changes. Other tribes want to meet the protector from beyond the mountains. Some have gifts they wish to offer." Marcus felt overwhelmed by this news. The idea that his actions had created ripple effects throughout the mountain communities was both humbling and slightly worrying. "But that's not the only reason you're here," Marcus said, reading her expression. Ayanna smiled at how well he knew her already. "You are right. I also come because I want to learn both worlds. The chief says I am good at languages, good at understanding different peoples. He thinks maybe I can be bridge between mountain tribes and outside world." Marcus understood immediately. Ayanna wasn't just visiting. She was exploring the possibility of living between two worlds, serving as a cultural ambassador. "That's a big responsibility," Marcus said. "Yes, but I learn from watching you. You help people not because you must, but because it is who you are. I want to be like that." They spent the day together with Marcus showing Ayanna around his farm and the surrounding area. She was fascinated by everything, from the local grocery store to the veterinary clinic where Marcus sometimes took his animals. As evening approached, Marcus asked the question that had been on his mind all day. "How long can you stay?" "Few more days," Ayanna said. "Then I must return." "But Marcus—" She looked serious now. "The chief also sent warning. There are rumors of new troubles in the mountains. Different kind of danger. People who want to take land from tribes who do not respect old agreements." Marcus felt his protective instincts flare up immediately. What kind of people? Men with machines and papers who say they own the mountains. They cut down sacred trees and scare away animals. Some tribes are frightened. Marcus thought about this troubling news. It sounded like development companies or mining operations were moving into previously untouched areas. "What can I do to help?" he asked. Ayanna smiled at his immediate willingness to get involved. "Chief thought you would say this. He asks if you would consider coming to great gathering of tribes. Many chiefs want to meet Protector, want to ask advice about dealing with outside world." Marcus felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. These people trusted him, valued his opinion, and needed his help navigating the complexities of the modern world. "When is this gathering?" Marcus asked. 2 weeks from now. It happens only once every few years when all mountain tribes come together. Very important." Marcus looked out his window toward the mountains, then at the carved staff standing in his living room. He had thought his adventure was over, but it seemed like it was just beginning. "I'll be there," Marcus said. "But this time, I want to understand more about what I'm getting into. Can you teach me about tribal politics and customs?" Ayanna's face lit up with excitement. "Yes, I will teach you everything. You will be first outsider ever invited to great gathering. You must be ready." As they made plans for the next few days, Marcus realized that his quiet farm life was about to become much more complicated. But looking at Ayana's hopeful expression and thinking about the brave people who had welcomed him as family, he knew he wouldn't have it any other way. The next morning, Marcus woke to find something that made his blood run cold. Outside his barn, arranged in a perfect circle, stood nearly 100 warriors from the mountain tribes. They had arrived silently in the night, and now they stood like statues, their spears and traditional weapons glinting in the morning sun. But they weren't threatening. As Marcus stepped outside, the warriors began to kneel one by one, their heads bowed in respect. At the center of the circle, the old chief stood waiting, holding a ceremonial staff that matched Marcus's own. Ayana appeared beside Marcus, her face glowing with pride and emotion. "They came to honor you," she whispered. Word spread through all the tribes about the gathering. They wanted to escort you personally to show respect for the protector. Marcus stood in his doorway, looking out at a sight that no one in the modern world had probably ever seen. 100 mountain warriors, representatives of a dozen tribes, standing guard outside a simple farmer's barn. His quiet life was definitely over, but as Marcus looked at these proud, brave people who had chosen to call him family, he couldn't imagine wanting it any other way. The greatest adventure of his life was just beginning.